Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 4, more on music aptitude.
Okay, Eric, so we have a speculative episode today that was inspired from our conversations recently. So I took an aptitude test recently, which is a lot of fun, and that inspired a lot of conversations and back and forth between us. But you brought up this interesting fact that Gordon talked about there being many more aptitudes than we traditionally test for, and some of these aptitudes are probably hard to even design tests for. But it's an interesting thought to have, because typically we tend to condense things down into thinking mainly rhythmically and tonally, and you're advocating, harmony should be in there as well. But
Gordon did as well, of course,
sure.
In his musical aptitude profile and his other tests of harmonic aptitude, whether that be the rhythmic component or the harmonic component. But those two, the HIRR, Harmonic Improvisation Readiness Record, and the Rhythmic Rhythmic Improvisation Readiness Record, are really, really squirrely, interesting tests, quite different than the other tests that are in his, library of aptitude measures. But yeah, we could break down the aptitude measures, or the aptitudes that are measured are ones that we know of, obviously. There's probably others that we know of but can't test, right? And then there's the ones that we don't know of. And if you don't know of them or can't conjecture what they might be, that we either don't know how to test or we don't know what the aptitude is, I think is a better way to say it.
Yep.
So, yeah, you took the advanced measures of music audiation, and from that, and it's a really neat, short, it's less than 20 minutes to take, and it gives you your tonal and rhythm aptitude, and it's even good for adults that are, beyond the scope of the norms that are put forth in the manual, but it can give us a general sense of, which is better, your tonal aptitude or rhythm aptitude, and then you can kind of infer from that whether you're high or low. But I don't think anybody, and I would love if people could find, answer sheets for this, and we could really do some looking into norms beyond the ones that are reported in the manual.
Mm-hmm.
But that's working with what we do know.
So can I just flag with something you said, just to help the listeners with context? So when you take this test,
flag and flog,
and flog. So when I took this AMMA test, I am given a raw score that tells me how many questions I actually got right. But then I'm given a percentile rating where my score is compared against the norms of people that have taken this test for the group that I'm in, which is what you were saying.
And all the aptitude measures do that.
Yeah.
It might only be one group, like with Audi. There's, the aptitude of a child, the tonal and rhythm, there's, kids that get 7 or 8 or more, and ones that get in the middle, or, whatever. But there's only one group in that case.
And that's going to fall on there's going to be a bell curve where you sit on that.
Yeah, that's the nature of percentile rankings.
Yeah.
They have to be built on the theory, that underlies almost all statistics. This is the bell curve. It is something that already exists in the real world.
Yeah, which is, it's interesting because I have not taken any statistics classes or anything like that. This is just something I picked up on from reading a ton of psychology research. You hear these things floating around, so your guidance here is much appreciated.
I love my measurement class, measurement and evaluation with Gordon, and I really could have taught subsequent classes that I had, uh, because of how much I got into it. I developed spreadsheets and easy ways to do all the calculations and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, we're looking for somebody who might already have a way to plug in the raw numbers of advanced measures of music audiation answers, and maybe come up with more norms or different item discrimination and item difficulty values for populations that are, say, professional musicians, for 20 years, or lay musician, other groups beyond college musician or college music major, right? That's what the one group
Or I
is.
thought it'd be interesting to have a group that was professional musicians that improvise and professional musicians that don't do any improv.
Yeah.
And that would be really fascinating because you get these high level classical musicians who spend zero time composing or improvising. And then
you see, that would be a great study.
Yeah.
Again, we're working with things that we already know, which is the foundation for what might we speculate beyond those measures, or beyond those, beyond what we've discovered from the validity studies for the music aptitude or AMMA,
mm-hmm.
and that and then the other ones looking at the weird scoring method for the AMMA, where it's different. If you haven't taken the test, so you just listen to two melodies, and the melodies may be the same, and if they're different, it's because of a tonal change, or it could be a rhythm change that makes it different. Mm-hmm. Now, there's never a tonal change and a rhythm change made. It's always just a tonal or a rhythm if there's a change.
It's funny, I remember one question specifically where I was really gassed. Like, I was convinced there was a rhythm and a tonal change.
Yeah.
I remember that. I knew it couldn't be possible, but
right.
I was fooled on that one.
Yeah. So, and then when you score them, it's a really interesting, and I don't remember because I haven't scored them in a while, but you get more points off if you've got if you said that's a rhythm change and it was a tonal change, than if you did and there was a change and you said the same, right? Or if you said there was a rhythm change and it was tonal, or vice versa, it was tonal and it was a rhythm change that was made. But how you score it, it's kind of like this side, use this scoring mask and then subtract this scoring mask from it. And then for the rhythm, you take this scoring mask and subtract this scoring mask from it, and you get a raw score from that. And it's a really interesting thing. And then there's a German study that kind of mostly agrees with Gordon, to my memory, but it's been a long time since I should have looked through it. But measuring music aptitude, when it comes down to it, we're looking at, does it predict the rate at which you'll learn, in tonality or in meters, or the rate at which you'll improve your performance in any of those two areas. But it doesn't attempt to go onto harmonic, at the same level, college. What is a college harmonic aptitude measure? I suppose you could use the high school norms that we have for the musical aptitude profile. And maybe there's norms that got developed. I don't use that for kids older than I need, so I haven't used it myself for beyond high school. Mm-hmm. So I think they do have norms for college kids.
Okay, so when we're talking about speculating about different kinds of aptitudes and possible ways of testing them, I think is it music aptitude profile that what's the aptitude test that has like quite a bit of different flavors of aptitudes that are tested for?
Yeah,
what is the
we talked about it with Ron back back in the day, Ron Malanga. That there's four there's four tests that are objective, and then there's three subjective measures that are done very objectively. But there's the melody, and then harmony, and then there's tempo and meter. Mm-hmm. And the first two combine to give you a composite tonal score, and the last two combine to give you a composite rhythm score. And then there's three that's what they call preference measures, and then non-preference measures would be the first, four tonal and rhythm measures. And the other ones are, which one is better, this or that, and it might be a timbral change, which one sounds better. You get, and then the bass goes, and it sounds better, so you pick that one. Another one has balance better, like how does this song end? They change the rhythm of the, bum ba dum bum 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 bum, and the other one's bum ba dum bum 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 bum, and then the second one just sounds better, right? So, and there's a third one. So there's balance, sensitivity, and they're misnamed, so it's hard for me to remember them because balance has nothing to do with the balance, like the woodwinds balance with the brass or whatever.
It's like phrase balance.
Yeah. And again, I don't use these very often, but they're really good. But Gordon tried to measure many other aptitudes, and he just didn't know, or potential aptitudes, and he just found that they didn't work. Or maybe that they didn't exist as an aptitude, or couldn't find a way to measure it. And one that you and I would love to be able to measure, but I don't know how you would do it, is form. How do you measure somebody's aptitude to remember or understand form? What are these big, long classical...
I think this is so important. Yeah, especially for improv, because, for you to know intuitively where you are in the form of a section, in a section of a chord progression or whatever, I've noticed it's not directly related, at least anecdotally, to where someone is in their ability to spit back rhythm patterns. So someone can be far down the sequence in terms of they know a ton of crazy rhythm patterns, but they might have not learned how to hear form, because if form is this odd thing, it's obviously related to meter. And it's obviously related to rhythm somehow, but it's at a different level of magnification. And I don't know how you would test this, because what do? You play the blues for somebody, and then you play the blues again, but you shave off the last 4 bars and say, are these the same or different?
Yeah, and that would hopefully be an easy item. But then how do you measure the much longer forms? Classical sonata, allegro form. You can't. You can't make that an aptitude, or I don't know how you would measure that in a valid way.
And I think part of the problem here is that when we do aptitude tests, we have this timing issue with the way audiation and working memory function. I was talking about this with you earlier off air, but when you have someone compare one melody to another, time has to elapse between those two, and there is a limit to how much you don't show them one Beethoven sonata and then a second Beethoven sonata with one tone changed. Like, it's insane. like that doesn't make any sense. It's too much information. But then the question is, like, when you test for form, to play someone a whole chord progression or a whole whatever series of changes, quite a bit of time has to elapse, like north of 10 seconds, and that's a big demand for some people. For other people, especially if you know certain songs or whatever.
Well, maybe.
But I've encountered these jazz musicians that they seem to have this insane ability to keep track of form.
Yeah.
That seems separate than just their ability to compose melodies or compose rhythm patterns on the spot, improvise them. It's definitely something else.
For the first 10 years that I was in a Dixieland jazz band, I always say early jazz or traditional jazz, but I should maybe say teens, 20s, 30s jazz is probably a better way to do it. But just to be sensitive to it's in New Orleans, it's inappropriate to say Dixieland because it's a cultural reference to them as opposed to a musical reference.
Yeah, that's great to know. I never actually knew that until you mentioned that to me a while ago.
Yeah, it's yeah. I just found out by going down there to play. What do you play? I said anything. But so before I got off track there for a second, I could suppose that there's an aptitude for this form. Maybe we need to start smaller. So maybe it's an 8-bar thing, and only 8 bars, but you change where the chord changes. Or you could do a different kind of form, and it's an 8-bar thing, and it's either an 8-bar thing or 8-bar with it. It could be even just an extra beat, but I think an extra measure or 8 and 12, and then do 12 and and
I
16,
have a really good example of
and
this.
do 16 and 16, and then at some point do 16 and 12. Do you feel it change? And you could say, is this the same amount of time, even though the progressions, the rhythm of the progressions was different, like the harmonic rhythm was different, but that's the same amount of time, and it's either a time difference or a chord change difference, or it was the same. That maybe it could work like AMMA that way, but you'd have to do you have to do longer phrases, I suppose, and then maybe that you also can do really longer phrases, like get up to 24 measures or 32, and basically things in 4, or maybe there should be unusual content on it, exactly. and it would be 3 bars, 4 bars, 3 bars. Feel that, and then 3 bars, 4 bars, 3 bars, and the bars could be triple. They could all be in triple. They could all be in duple. They could be mixed up, or they could be unusual. But like an ABA thing, but you're changing either the harmonic progression or the length of it or the meter of it. There's so many possibilities.
It really starts getting crazy because you can use harmony to signal rhythmic form, but you don't have to. You can just use the structure of the rhythm itself. I mean, I remember my friend once, he asked me to listen to this like John Mayer song that he was really into. And I was listening to it, and I immediately texted him. I was like, oh, this is cute. The intro, it kind of sounds like it should be 16 bars, but there's one extra bar before he starts singing. Yeah. And I texted my friend, and he was like, I didn't even notice that. Yeah. And I was like, oh, didn't you feel like the singer should have came in here?
Yeah.
And then he went back and counted it. He was like, you're right. But I mean, the point of the story is I wasn't counting anything. It just felt like in that next bar, that's where the singer should have came in, and they did an extra. Yeah. It was like a joke, right?
Yeah,
and that's often how you interpret these things when you can spot them in music. They sound like little jokes.
Now here's the catch, and I also want to relate what you're talking about back to what John Feyerabend said in his episode. That, well, I'll just say it now, that the harmonic structure gives the form. The big changes if you don't understand the harmonic structure, which is usually much longer than than the smaller chunks, that gives you form. And so like that, so the kicker is the important piece is that we need to be able to find people that haven't studied music at all that can do the same and still score high. And that's the nature of aptitude. Aptitude is something that doesn't have to necessarily been developed, that they're maybe missing the teaching, but are still high aptitude, right?
So this opens up a whole nother can of worms, because I mean that's going to be very difficult to do in terms of form. But
well, we don't know, but it's hard enough to do it among musicians, I would think. So this is maybe a reason that we don't have a valid form already, or a test of form aptitude.
But I'm thinking if you could find a group of, let's say you had a group of professional musicians who you could prove that like they all understand, they can all hear a 1, a 4, and a 5 chord, and you first filter people that can and can't. Hopefully if they're professional musicians they can. So you have a group that can, but then couldn't you try to teach them different songs with different harmonic forms with just those functions, and then track how many repetitions or how many trials it takes them as a way to correlate their ability to soak up harmonic form?
But what you're measuring there is achievement.
No, but what I'm saying is, like, you measure achievement, but you keep track of how many trials it takes them to achieve a certain level, and then you correlate that with an aptitude.
Wow. Yeah, you could. That's an impossible or very, very difficult kind of study to have.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, even to do a traditional kind of, not, see, that's a long-term process, and there's just so much variability that come in terms of the teaching, or that comes in, you'd need a lot of participants. And especially to develop an aptitude measures require much, much, much larger groups of your sample size, because what you're trying to do is apply that to the population at large. Whatever it is, you're talking about musicians who don't improvise and musicians that do, and how to determine the difference of their aptitudes based on how. Yeah, it's just a. Where do you draw? It's just a lot of gray, and so there's going to be a lot of error. And once you've got a lot of error, you lose your reliability, and with reliability goes your validity. So it's not something you can pin down easily at all. It's something at minimal very difficult and almost impossible to do, especially without millions of dollars to bribe people to participate, or I don't know how you capture your sample like that. But there are some ideas that might be worth pursuing until the point that you find that they don't work. But that's 9/10 of the rule of breaking through and finding something new is you're gonna how many failures you're going to have along the way. So form is, there probably is an aptitude for form, but how do you measure it? That's a whole. Well,
at least even anecdotally, just based off how many improvising musicians you've met, clearly some of them learn the form of a song faster, and it doesn't seem like. Not in a conceptual way, not in a theoretical way where they have the chart in front of them. They're literally just listening to the song and they're like, oh yeah, that was clearly 8 bars, that was clearly 16 bars. Like they just have this intuitive grasp of the form of the song after listening to it like once or twice. So whether it's the phrase sizes or the ABAB, whatever.
Right. So we test them. All right. So we find out that this group learns the form. It takes 2 or 3 hours, and another group takes a week. Another group takes, right? How intense?
I think tracking it on trials would make more sense.
Yeah, but tracking. Now that we've got, say, we've found a way to understand it using that method, right?
Sure.
The scientific method I'm talking about, right? And now we want to find out where you fit in. What do we got to do? We got to send you through the same trials. That's not a very efficient way to learn somebody's aptitude. It's probably just better to teach them and learn it. You'll discover their aptitude by how. I don't know.
I know.
I just don't know. So that it's inevitable.
One of the reasons I think about this is
so many
because
times before you actually get a trial that actually worked that way.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons this is all floating around in my mind is a lot of people, when they get into improv, they don't realize how much rhythmic problems show up as inability to improv. Like people in jazz especially are very focused on harmony. Like it's people, more chords, more scales, more singing patterns, more singing things like that. But it's often, from what I found, just people's inability to make coherent rhythmic statements and keep track of the form that are really like big obstacles to improvising. I'm not saying the harmony is not a big obstacle. I'm saying that often, if you have a very succinct rhythmic phrase that fits with the form, it seems to make more musical sense than having an uncoherent rhythmic phrase that just kind of outlines the harmony properly. And I mean, even Gordon talked about that in his little pamphlet on instrumental harmonic improvisation. But you know, that's it's just a really funny thing.
Yeah, it's hard to get my brain wrapped around it, knowing how well Gordon did his research on all his aptitude measures, and now we're talking about stuff he couldn't or he didn't crack, and maybe it was due to time. But I think but you also got to start where it's a little bit easier to get a sense of some things. Why music aptitude profile is so impressive is if you just look at the follow-up on that to prove the validity of that, the longitudinal predictive validity studies. So we gave the aptitude measure and they scored really high in the tonal and the harmonic, and then the not so good in all the others, and then you track them for 7 years on their instrumental studies, and you find out that their tonal achievement is so much stronger than their other. Right? And that's superiorly, it's just beyond what I could ever consider doing. That's what makes him so towering a figure, is the massive amount of work and the thinking that came out of that work, let alone the thinking that went into the work.
A question I have, on average, are people's rhythm aptitudes higher than their tonal aptitudes?
No, it's
usually the other way around.
No.
Or is
it? Yeah. First of all, the tests.
I mean, I guess
the
it
two
depends
different tests.
how you construct the questions.
No. The aptitude measure. So you say, if you're high in one of the aptitudes, say let's just boil it down to tonal and rhythm, and not consider the other, the harmonic and the meter versus the melodic and the speed, right? Tempo. So just nail it down to those two. If you're high in one of those, it's very unlikely you're high in the other.
It's unlikely you're high.
Yeah. If you're low in one, like really low, it's unlikely you're high in the other.
So you're saying you commonly get your average at one and either high or
it's
low.
likely that you're better or high, more it is to have another aptitude that's as low. That's a little bit more specific. If you're if you're average in one, you're going to be average, a little above average, right? But there's you almost never have the same unless you're average in both. That's more easily done. So you got to think about two curves against each other.
Yep. But when you mean average, are you saying like you're in the middle of the bell?
Yeah, say between the 30th and the 70th percentile, or whatever you want to do, 30th and 80th.
So how common? I mean, because like mine, for example, how common is it that someone's like 80 to 90 in one, in both? Sorry, in both.
Less common than somebody to be above average in both, but not high in both. You're high in both, pretty much.
What's considered high, by the way?
Usually 80th percentile.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So if I measured you, I'd be really strongly, telling your parents, keep this guy in music forever. So you can't anymore.
So when you see 80s, you're really like pushing people.
This is
probably a good.
You're very maybe very, very good. Are you excellent? No, because that'd be 90th or 95th. And then it gets to the point where the difference between the 96th and the 99th percentile is vastly different than somebody who's average and at the 90th percentile. There's a larger difference, which is really kind of cool.
That's wild.
There's just so few people up at that top, the same as the bottom. There's just so very, very few that are, at that genius level. Same as somebody who would be, just barely can get one right at the low end.
Yeah.
Assuming that they're following the directions and can do that.
Sure.
That the test is appropriate for them, to take. Because, obviously, give somebody who's very low functioning individual in many areas, and they're not, they might not be appropriate to take the test unless we find a way to alter the test so that they can understand, so that they have time to, to respond to the musical elements. Not that, the directions.
Another thing I was curious about that just popped into my mind. Did Gordon ever do aptitude tests among like air quote world class performers? And did he go after that? Or world class composers or whatever it is. Did John Williams.
He measured the music aptitude of the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Oh yeah, okay.
All right, and we found out that they weren't much better than 60 or 65 percentile.
Of the college trained group?
Well, he didn't use AMMA on them. He used musical aptitude profile. I don't think AMMA was when he did that. I don't know the study. I just remember him talking about it. We have a lot of musicians who are really, really brilliant technicians that don't necessarily have the aptitude, but boy, they can practice and be really, really good. Or you could consider how good would our orchestras be if they were all 80th percentile and above. How much, right? Somebody doesn't just practice to become good technically, but they also can be musical without being the imitators in the group.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and another part of this that I think is really interesting is your intrinsic motivation to study music. If someone's 60th percentile, 80th percentile, 95th, the person that's really, really high might not even really want to learn music. Yeah,
oh, absolutely. I've had a few students like that. And likewise, if you're at the 50th percentile, but you just love it, it's just like me. I'm not 50th, but, above average. At least as far as I can tell, we don't have norms for when I took the test, right? This is why I want to get more precise norms for advanced music, more populations to compare to get norms for people like you and me. Right? And then where do you divide the populations up past that? Jazz musicians, right? But then there's the jazz musicians that don't understand form, right? It gets, right? There's just, we can only measure what we know, and then once you know what measure you're after, then how do you design that? And then how do you apply that to other people? A music aptitude test is really nothing more than a shortcut to understanding your student, so that you can teach to their individual differences, which is probably the biggest thing Gordon said. Besides, number one is at least how he presents it in the music aptitude profile. The number one reason for this is to find those people, to highly encourage them to participate in music.
For sure.
Because that goes beyond the classroom, right?
Yeah.
The other is like, how do you teach so that now that you're in the classroom, well, that's you want to understand how your children's learning differences are working so that you can teach them better by giving them content that better suits what they're going to be able to achieve, so that we don't bore them and that we don't teach too quickly.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think that this is being used to exclude anyone from participating in music.
No, that's exactly.
People that are ready for something more challenging are getting the instruction that meets their needs.
Yes, that's the thing that are the biggest misuses of his exams, and what people used to of his aptitude measures, not really exams, but that's the first thing he was accused of, and he's like, no, that's the wrong purpose. But now that we could, but just from the outside looking in, it's like now that we can measure this, it kind of like becomes like the eugenics thing, that people, right?
Well, I'm just picturing a private music teacher, any possible students that come to them, they give an aptitude measure, and they're like, well, you're not past 80, so I mean, I'm not that interested.
That doesn't have anything to do with the validity of the measure. It's a
But in a way, that's what a lot of high-profile universities are doing, because you're not going to see these crazy teachers unless you get to this level of achievement anyway, and you need the aptitude to get you to certain levels of achievement. So it's very... don't go to the dark side. That's what we're saying.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say. Exactly that's very much has to do with the validity of the teacher as a human being.
Which we have a test for, by the
way. It's called the sniff test. You can smell them a mile away. I've thought about this for like if a prestigious music institute gave this music aptitude test, and of course they want to strongly encourage the students or give scholarship to the students that have high music aptitude and less means, right? Mm-hmm. Or you could say, well, here's this kid who didn't do very well in the performance but has extremely high aptitude, and you go look at their folder and you find out that they've only been practicing the violin for 3 years and they're already at this level. So they got a slow start, so they're not the best kid. They might be the in the bottom third, and yet but they're so high aptitude that God, you want to give them more opportunity, because they're going to grow quickly because of the high aptitude, but they just haven't had. So you can't judge their aptitude by their performance.
And
unless it's
really
super high, then you say, oh yeah, they're high aptitude and have worked a long time.
Sure.
If they're properly motivated, or they haven't worked at all, and they're gonna die out. They're gonna get bored. I'm really good at this, but I'm 17 years old, 18 years old, and then like by the time I'm 20, it's like maybe not the thing I'm interested in pursuing for my life. It's just where my parents pushed me into, kind of thing. You don't have autonomy over. Here we go, and this will predict some of our next episode. All the what are the three? Because you're better at this than I am.
The self-determination theory.
Yeah. Autonomy and
mastery and relatedness.
Yes.
But I was gonna say it makes it very weird for grading students, because if you're a high school music teacher, like I never practiced my saxophone or my tuba ever. I mean, but I always got like 95% in band class. But my grade was more of a reflection of my aptitude than my, I was practicing in class.
Yeah.
But there really were other students who were practicing a lot. And it seems, I mean, if the grade is a reflection of how much achievement you have, I guess. But, in some way it just seems wrong. It almost feels like grading someone based on how tall they are. So
here's what we got to when I was taking measurement and evaluation in music education, so with Gordon. Mm-hmm. So I was in his class and we learned how to calculate means and standard deviations and and all the statistics that go into, and then also how do you measure musicianship, how do you measure performance ability, or ability to improvise even, and all that. How do you measure this and get good solid data on the people in your class? And then, so if you give them a test that's a pencil paper test and you ask them questions and make them think, say there's a kid in there that just aces the tests all the time, but his aptitude's really super high, right? And then you've got a kid in there that's really pretty good, 60, 70 percent of answers are really right, but his aptitude is low, right? And what do you there's a combination of these two. So it's ideographic norms, right? It's like you against yourself. How do you evaluate that? And then there's ideographic and normative. So you against the class and you against yourself. Yep. So if you always measure you against yourself, isn't that more valid than measuring you against the class? But then where do you stand in terms, right? So it seems like there should always be two scores.
Yeah.
That you should take into consideration. If you're high performance and medium aptitude, you're working your butt off.
It opens up a really interesting just conversation in terms of ethics, right?
Oh yeah.
Like fast, because like it seems inherently unethical to give the kids with higher aptitudes more opportunities, but in a very down to earth way. Like, I'm not trying to get into the NBA because I'm not tall enough, right? And I didn't start training. So it's like, it's very useful for me to know, like, I'm not going to make the cut, so it's probably not worth, going after the NBA. But music is in a sense an art form. It's not competitive in the same way that sports are. Like, you can be a professional musician with lower aptitude. Like, you could be a songwriter or a composer or whatever. It's not like you have to be better in music doesn't always mean like more aptitude doesn't mean a better career necessarily.
No, not at all. I've got the best career ever, and I don't have the aptitude for it, maybe. And then there's the outliers. There's the Spud Webbs, right? And then there's the people that are 7 foot tall, and they've got no coordination, right? So Spud Webb is, what is he, 5'6" or something? But yet he had a very good career as an NBA.
I think Mike Bibby was like 5'9" or 5'11".
Yeah. There's a couple, 3 of them that were really, really short, and yet did really well because they're quick, just super quick.
Then the next thing that this opens up is some kind of intervention beyond musical training that can increase aptitude, which I remain very hopeful for in terms of neurochemistry and stuff like that.
I don't know, because the definition of music aptitude is that you're trying to get rid of all those factors as much as possible, and there's no way to do it.
I don't deny that to date there's nothing that's been found.
Well, there's.
I'm saying I remain hopeful.
Yeah.
Because if you have high aptitude, there literally must be a part of your brain that is wired better for some task, and there must be some theoretical way you can.
Yeah.
Surgically enhance that or increase that somehow.
Well, to be clear, that every aptitude measure has some level of achievement in it. You can't get rid of it all. And plus, on top of that, there's error.
But Eric, what I'm saying is we're gonna find Mozart's DNA. We're gonna grow Mozart's brain, and then we're gonna take that part and surgically put it in mine. That's
I got you. And then also the vice versa is that you've got just exactly the opposite of what I said. There's no music achievement measure that doesn't also include aptitude, and that one's a little bit more obvious.
So maybe we'll start wrapping it up, but one plan that I'm going to do is the aptitude test. I've taken 2 so far. I was severely undercaffeinated for both. So the next one I take, I don't know, you can choose when I take it. It can be a month or 2 months. I'm going to drink basically a pot of coffee before I take it, and hopefully I don't get so nervous that I just get them all wrong.
Yeah,
but I'd be very curious to see, because I notice my performance in general is worse when I'm undercaffeinated and I'm experiencing caffeine withdrawals. But I mean, who knows?
We got to try you out against 30 other people just like you that also drink coffee and see how many of those go down. And it depends on
there's a lot of substances,
right? And then I don't tolerate caffeine at all. If I drink 2 cups of green tea, I'm wired.
Oh, for sure.
Right? I used to smell the difference between. In fact, that's up until very, very recently that I've actually even tried green tea, because I'm so sensitive to it that half a cup of regular coffee. I mean, you're showing me a huge cup.
I'm literally drinking green tea. Right?
Oh God, I lost my train already. Yeah. So we have to the
You're probably a fast
no,
metabolizer of
well,
caffeine. That's
yeah,
probably why.
yeah, and all the differences. Like my dad used to drink a half a pot of coffee between dinner and bedtime. And just had no issue. Like it doesn't affect him at all. So yeah, the
That's what my wife is like.
caffeine tolerance would be
My
the
wife will be like drinking coffee after dinner. I'm like looking at her. I'm like, "Are you insane?" And she's like, "It does. It's not gonna do
so
anything." Or
you're introducing some of the stuff that they try to take out of the test. Because when you get 2,000 people in a sample, that you're going to find all those other things, and they're accounted for in the math.
so supposed caffeine
It's
use
all
is
in there.
accounted for.
Anything that's error that's beside the aptitude, that you're trying to measure, is accounted for in the mess that is
That
humanity.
still doesn't dislodge my faith that there is some kind of chemical or
Yeah,
neurological
no,
intervention
no,
that could theoretically,
yeah,
upregulate auditory cortex
yeah,
like growth or something like that.
yeah,
Like, because there's research on vasopressin, um, leaning people more towards absolute pitch. Like
yeah,
once that if you take vasopressin as an adult, I think there was a study that shows like people start developing absolute pitch while taking
I'd
it.
be
So
curious to see that. Yeah, too. What I do know is I worked with he's fairly famous, Dr. Charles Lim, and he was a jazz musician that did cochlear implants. In fact, when I first met him, he invited me to witness a couple surgeries, and I sat like within 10 feet of the patient while and this boy had very abnormal anatomy throughout his body, but his head especially. And he set up a cochlear implant in this kid after many hours, and then he invited me to stay for the second one. I'm like, I don't have that time. And he did it in like 25 minutes. And so anyway, there's a piece that gets inserted into the auditory nerve, and and then is stimulated outside, right? By the noise. And these kids are deaf or ostensibly deaf at birth, so they don't get any sound at all, or very, 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 little differentiation in light, or what light. I'm sorry, I was trying to draw an analogy and got mixed up. But anyway, just very, very, very little, if any. You have to have severe loss. I forget what the threshold is. But one of these kids who did get a cochlear implant very early in life, like earlier than 8 months, it's like 6 months old or something, and she, over time, had a father, her music aptitude was really pretty good. It was like the 60th percentile.
So she missed out on everything up till there.
That 6 months is probably really important. The other kids were less than that, or this, off the scale bad, because of the amount of experience they had, and plus whatever, uh, you know, uh, just the physical.
That's essentially what I want to know the answer to is like, what is it about these developmental ages, like 0 to 2 years, like neurochemically that's going on that's making people so sensitive to
the growth of certain, neurosystems.
I know, but then it's like, well, what is it chemically that's causing that, and why can't an adult do something to put their brain in that kind of state that would cause
it boils down to nature nurture, and I don't know, nobody tracks that for something that won't affect your life. We want to solve the issues of congenital diseases that kill children, before we want to help nurture music aptitudes by biological methods, or it's not a high priority in the medical world, but at some point that'll be a question like the in vitro fertilization is, I suppose. How much do we want to engineer the human being? And but even,
I mean, I'm holding up for stem cells. You're just gonna inject your own stem cells into your own brain.
Yeah,
and,
this is again a low priority for music compared to kids that will not have any quality of life of any type without preventing or slowing down their disease.
Theoretically, could you imagine if we could literally just totally level the playing field? Like anyone who has subpar aptitude, like we could just bring them right up to 95th percentile. Just like the percentiles wouldn't even make sense anymore once we started doing something like that.
I think some of these thoughts are interesting to think about, but I can't imagine that there would ever be more important to put money into into music aptitude than it would be to cure cancer or heart congenital heart disease and these.
I totally agree.
So it gets a little outside of how I can process what's important to do if we're really harvesting stem cells.
What would probably happen actually is one of these other forms of research that's like curing some kind of brain like issue just spontaneously also give someone ludicrous music aptitude like as a byproduct, like air quote side effect.
And then the people who are rich and privileged will get that when they don't need it for the other reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of ethical questions.
Yeah, it's hugely ethical, and it might be interesting to think about, but we didn't get into a lot of these issues. I was going to say we didn't get into the other possible music aptitudes, like why is my buddy just remember every horn lick and everything he's ever heard maybe once or twice, yet he's not that great an improviser. I've probably been improvising longer. I'm not that much better than him that way, and also could just be a stylistic thing. But right, so it's like, but man, he just.
So this is what I was saying. When you have the stages of audiation, there probably are differences in people's ability to like process each stage. So like, I think what the aptitude tests are testing for is your ability to. That's why I always use this analogy between working memory, but I've never heard anyone in MLT talk about this. But the aptitude tests seem like a gauge of your raw working memory power in that area.
Yeah.
So like your raw ability to hold tonal patterns in your mind.
So there's
or rhythm patterns.
There's this difference of long-term memory that you can't put when you do long-term memory and try to put an aptitude test. Well, long-term memory doesn't work that way. You can't take a shortcut to understand it. So maybe there's an aptitude measure.
But then it's like, how many trials does a student need to take a tonal pattern and put it into long-term memory? But it gets so convoluted because if someone is just in a state of intrinsic motivation, that can supercharge your ability to synthesize long-term memory. Just being more interested in the moment,
but then it stops being an aptitude at some level.
That's
or maybe it does.
I've also encountered people. I've encountered people that have the same issue that you're talking about, where like they can remember the licks, but they can't improvise. Or like me, for example, my students are often surprised. Like they ask to learn a song, I can figure it out in a second and teach it to them. But then next week, I'm like, "How is it going?" And they can play the song, and I don't know it again.
We've reverted back to our old style of podcast where we just go out into the weeds and drill down.
It's gonna be hard for us.
This one is worth that, though, to me, to start thinking about, what are other aptitudes, right? What's it?
We cover a lot of bases here.
What's a timbral aptitude? Like how many instruments can you synthesize in your mind, right? Are you able to do 50 musicians? Can you do 120? Can you do 4 different parts? Can you do 2?
Yeah. But like you said, some of these questions might just start returning such minimal gains based on the amount of time you need to sort the answers out. I mean, maybe that's why Gordon was just eventually like...
Just the most basic.
Yeah.
Right? So,
ethics, stem cells,
Let's see what else.
neuroscience.
Cochlear implants and
Yeah.
yeah, it's there's just a lot of possibility that's fun to think about, and also expanding, what we already know about aptitude would be worthy of good study.
I'm not planning on having kids, but this really almost makes me wish I was.
I'm worried about your ethical choices here.
Well, I'm pretty sure my wife has high tonal aptitude because, just being around her, it's ridiculous how quickly she learns stuff. But I'm gonna give her a test.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
But I mean, this one of the other questions I had is like, we often say introducing all these different tonalities to kids is so good for them. But I mean, if I had kids, they'd be getting some weird stuff. Like they'd be getting all the harmonic minor tonalities, the melodic. Like I that would just be standard issue.
Yeah.
But what does that
That's
do to
Gordon's
somebody?
supposition for why do we give those, at least the 7 basic tonalities, which we know there are many more.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, including
song.
floating aeolian, another attribution to Ron.
Floating aeolian is a legitimate thing that you find.
I know, it just made so much sense to his description, this floating aeolian. Yeah. So.
All right, I think that's.
Let's shut up. At least for the public. All right. Thanks.